Morning, Bruce.
Morning, Sam. How are things?
Things are moving. Things are moving.
Good. That means they're alive then.
It's definitely what it means. How are you and yours?
Can't complain. Things are progressing gradually.
Good. Welcome, folks, to the December 13th, 2023 Aries Working Group call. Some great topics and discussions ahead. This is a hyperledger call, so the antitrust policy and the code of conduct are in effect. Links are in the agenda. Agenda link is in the chat. Of course, you can always find it the regular way on the wiki. You're invited to make any changes you would like to the agenda that are useful for the community. You can add yourself to the attendees list or anything else. Is there anyone new today that would like to introduce themselves? See a bunch of recognizable names. Glad you're here. Announcements. The way that the calendar falls this year, the 27th of December is in between Christmas and New Year, and I imagine that attendance will be quite low. And so I propose that we hold no meeting on December 27th, but then that we're back on the 3rd of January. And I realize we may still be in a little bit of vacation mode, but it seems a little bit more reasonable to start then. Any commentary on taking the 27th off? I got a thumbs up from Timo. Awesome. Okay. Any projects want to share release status or work updates?
PR was merged this week for caching of pool transactions, indie pool transactions in indie VDR. So Aries Framework should be planning on adding that capability in. It greatly simplifies what needs to happen to improve retrieving, especially initial retrieval of indie transactions for connections. We'll plan on making sure there's a release for that. I was just checking on the tagging and what release that will be. Obviously, it'll be release 4.0 is 0.40 is the current, and so it'll be a 0.5.
Awesome. Is that an automatic thing, or are there adjustments to it?
There does have to be, because the framework has to tell NDVDR where to put the cache. It has to be a opt-in, unfortunately.
Okay. Well, that's okay, but you've done the work to make it opt-in, so
Yeah.
someone's done the work to make it opt-in, I should say.
Wasn't me.
Yeah.
The Occupy had a really good presentation yesterday from the folks at Indicio, Shar and Daniel Bloom and Alex Walker on OpenID for VC issue, OpenID for VCI plugin for Occupy. So you're now able to use Occupy, and the presentation talked about where the split was between what the plugin does with the protocol, what goes into the Occupy storage for that. So yeah, super good session.
Cool.
And we're just down into the final stretch of working on the and non-creds in W3C format, Rust library updates. Those are now almost complete. We've got one more tweak to make, and then we should be there. So that's interesting and exciting. And there's
Excellent.
lots of good work going on with Akapai and AFJ for using that and enabling us to use strictly, or eventually be able to move strictly W3C format and on-creds credentials. So that won't become an issue in the future. That'll be just happening.
Awesome. Very cool. All right. I see Timo adding a whole bunch of stuff to the, we should probably retitle this, but the agent, currently named Agent Framework JavaScript. Timo, anything that you want to call out there?
Yeah, so I think most of it I wrote down also, but I also announced it in the Discord, but like Aries Framework JavaScript has been accepted to be housed under the Open Wallet Foundation. So the repository has already moved, and we're now working on doing all the migration work, making sure packages are updated, docs, everything. In the link, there's a short announcement. We want to do a bigger announcement when it's like everything is in place, and I think we're currently also looking for a new name for which a discussion is open, and we want to finalize that in the coming 2 weeks or something, and then we can finalize that. But for now, there shouldn't change too much in like what we are working on. So I think still working on 0.5, doing a lot of like technical improvements, like dropping in the SDK, other node versions, revocation, and also keep working on OpenInfoVC, SDJots, and we just started this week also on like the implementation for W3C issuance and verification with ANOCRED credentials. So that should get merged in the coming weeks, months. And then currently we're just trying to get everything in a place where we can do a stable release 0.5 again, but it's already always difficult with all the moving parts.
Indeed. Is this the current link for meetings up here?
Yeah, currently it is still. We're working with Open Wallet to get that in place, have the new ones. But until that is done, this is still the vetted link.
Cool. Yes, that would be awesome. I'm trying to keep track of where the meetings are in the adjustment and when it happens. So that's awesome as it transitions. Cool. Excellent, and this is exciting for the did peer 4 and the did rotate stuff as well. So yeah, very cool. Other updates.
Aries Creative Project has been adding module support so that you can test things other than Akapai for the load testing environment. The concept being is that there's an interface that you would fulfill to do your load testing against.
Right. Cool. Lots going on. Other updates? Awesome. Great work, everyone. On the agenda today, a quick marketing check-in, and then we have a quick check-in on the unqualified DIDs work to get the software support in, and a quick check-in on that. Timo is here to talk about an attachment format for issue present to include JOTs and SDJots. Matthew requested time to talk about trust input protocol, and there's a link there. Stephen has looked for time for the JSON RPC discussion as a continuation of last week. Any adjustments that we want to make before we get started? All right, and then right before the end, I want to talk about what we want to talk about next week as our last meeting of the year. Helen, Alex, I think we had Helen.
Yep, I'm here.
Any updates on the marketing stuff?
Just that we've submitted the new logo for implementation to the Hyperledger staff for them to distribute an update across the board. I think they're still waiting on some other Hyperledger projects to finish their other, like, Cactus and Besu, I don't know, whatever, like some other ones. I'm not exactly sure which ones, but not having to do with Aries, that are still waiting to update their logos. And once they do, they're going to roll them all out together. We will be skipping the last Tuesday in December for a meeting, so we'll meet in January. And then the outstanding item from last week was talking about some kind of interop event. Is that a conversation you wanted to have today, or did you want to wait next week?
So I think it bundles well with next week
Okay.
to talk about the state of the Aries stuff and like what's on deck and stuff like that. So is that okay if we bundle it together with next week?
That's totally fine. Sounds good.
Sweet. Awesome.
Thank you.
So I know we said next week last week, but I continued to be next week this week. So
Perfect. That sounds good. Thank you.
awesome. Questions about marketing? Awesome. Unqualified dids check in. And the goal here, I didn't put the link in here, but the goal is for the is on the 17th. Ideally, we have the necessary support for things. So this is did peer forward, did rotate, that implemented in software so that can be rolled out to make that happen. So sorry Timo, about getting the title wrong. We'll fix that. But any feedback? We already got a report from AFJ that there are PRs open for these, and I know that there has been some progress inside of Akapai. Any other comments that folks want to add about hitting this goal for implementing the software pieces that we need for the initial step?
Could you repeat the last part of the question? Sorry that I didn't hear the last part.
Well, just questions about or any feedback on where folks are for the software implementations necessary to align with the community coordinated update. And I don't have a link here. I apologize for that. I'll go hunt one down.
Yeah. I
but,
think. Oh yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say you've already mentioned that that we've got you've got PRs open for those, which is the necessary piece. So on your way.
Yeah, it's just that it's, as I said, with like we have some different pieces that we need to get in place before we can release 0.5, which means even if we merge it before like December 17th, it won't be in a stable release, which means it won't be actually usable. And so I think that may be a bit of a blocker on our side to get this implemented or like ready for usage soon.
I suspect you're not the latest along in the development timeline, so that's there. Any initial plans for when 0.5 plans to be wrapped?
No, no, we would need to look at that. There's some, I think we're quite close. There's some open PRs related to, for example, in the SDK, and we're having some issues with Ascar, so that's not helping. And like these kind of issues make it hard to give an estimation, because if you knew how to fix it, then it would have been done already. So yeah, no concrete timelines.
Okay, we'll keep checking in. And we do recognize that this is hard to coordinate across the community. The point about sticking a date on it is not to beat anybody up, but to just have a realistic conversation about when. And so let's touch in with this next week, and we're likely going to want to shift that date. So when we can all expect to get there next week. But any projects, if you have feedback on when you think a realistic expectation of when you might have that shipped, that would be useful to coordinate about. Okay, and with that, let's pass it over to Timo, and I will correct the title as you talk.
Perfect. Let me share my screen and share this one here. All right. Is this visible? Okay, perfect. Thanks. Okay. So for the work we're currently doing to allow AnonCreds credentials to be like issued as W3C credentials and also proven using like W3C format, we're looking how to do that using DITCOM. And for presentation, the idea is to use the presentation exchange from diff. But for issuance, there's the JSON-LD RFC 0593, but like we want to support some features like issuing a credential with multiple proofs on it, which is not fully possible with this one. And one thing that has been missing from DITCOM for a long while is being able to issue a JWT credential W3C VC using DITCOM. Like there's not really a way defined currently how you want to do that. So the idea was to define a new attachment format that can supersede RC 0593 and maybe at some point also the India attachment format if we can issue AnonCreds credentials using this one. And also add in some new features that were missing from the current JSON-LD credential attachment format. With the main goal being supporting both JSON-LD and JWT-based proof formats, issuing a credential that will have multiple proofs on it, and being explicit about that in the protocol. And also, I think what was missing a bit from the previous version, and that's something I want to put up for debate if it is in scope for the attachment format itself, but I think it can help a lot, is like doing binding using the attachment format. So letting the holder provide a DIT that will be used as the subject in the credential. And we have had some discussions of that in a long time ago on how we can do that. And there was a protocol also supported for it. So maybe that's still the way to go, but I think maybe add some simplicity and explicitness if we do it right in the attachment format. So I'll go over the initial flow I have now, and it's all still very work in progress, but I think there's some things we can decide on what the direction should be here. But what I currently have is a attachment format that focuses solely on W3C verifiable credentials. And so that means that, for example, STJOT VCs are excluded from this because STJOT VCs don't follow the W3C data model. And I think there's multiple flavors within W3C VCs, so that's like JSON-LD, JOTs, and all these kind of things. So I think that's enough flexibility within one attachment format, and that we define another attachment format for issuing STJOT VCs, because then there's a bit more simplicity in this one, because the credential that will be issued will always be a credential following the W3C data model. So I also looked a lot on like the VC API and the OpenID issuance protocol and how they did it there. Basically, this is, for example, a credential offer attachment, and we will have multiple formats that can be supported. And in this case, I have defined a JWT VC or a data integrity VC. Data integrity is the new name for linked data proofs. And there's some other metadata types, so like indicating which crypto suits you support. And this is like the binding method I talked about earlier, and this is like indicating which binding methods do you support. And I currently have defined two, where one would be an AnonCreds link secret. So if you do AnonCreds issuance, the user would provide a blinded link secret, and you would put that in the credential, and that is a way to bind the credential to the holder receiver of the credential. And another way I've done defined here, very open to do it in another way, is like using a DITCOM signed attachment. So you would, in the request message later on, you would attach also a signed attachment that you sign with a specific DIT or key that you want the credential to be bound to. And this way we can verify the binding of the credential subject. You have a credential, there's a request nonce, and there's some options. And this will need to be extended. I'm still thinking of like, how can we specifically integrate Anacred's stuff in here? Then we have the request message, and in here you can include the format, and then you have the binding proof method, and the binding proof method defines, okay, how do we do the proof binding? And in here there's two defined. So one is the Anacred's link secret, and in that case the method would need to be Anacred's link secret, and then you can put in everything that is needed within an Anacred's request, so you can bind the credential to the specific holder. And the other one is a DITCOM signed attachment, where you would reference the ID of the attachment, and then the attachment that is a signed attachment that would have to include the nonce that was in the offer to prevent replay attacks and the audience, which would need to be the issuer ID from the offered credential, so we know it's specifically intended for this exchange. Here you would have an ALK and you can include a kit, and this way the issuer then knows, all right, in the actual credential that is issued, I can use this as the credential subject ID, or if the binding method is Anacred's link secret, there would be no credential subject ID, but it will still be bound using a link secret. And of course, you won't use the link secret way if you use JOT credentials, because you can use those together. Finally, you have a credential attachment where you again have the format, and you have the signed credential, which depends a bit on which format, proof format you use. In case of a JWT, it will be a string, and otherwise it will be an object containing a W3C credential with a proof property. Then here there's another section that goes into more detail on the different proof formats you have, and it will define some rules of like what needs to be included, or like what are the rules for each of these proof formats. So if you have JWT-VCs, the cryptographic suite supported must be valid JSON web algorithms. You can't use Anacred's link secret, and this must be a string. And for the DIVC, it must be an object with a proof. One thing I wasn't sure about yet is that in the W3C specification, they now fully refer to data integrity proofs. But if you look at the data integrity proofs specification, it has more restrictions on the proof object, like that it must contain a proof value that is multi-base encoded. Well, there's a lot of linked data proof signature suits defined that don't use that structure. They, for example, use a JWS key. So I'm not really sure it feels to me like by changing the whole, instead of like, this is in the V1.1, they changed it from linked data proof to data integrity proof containing a spec that is now has breaking changes. So we may need to add, like, in addition to DIVC, add linked data proofs, LDP VC here as well to support like more of the old types. So that's what I currently have. And there are some open questions I have, but maybe first, curious if someone has questions on this, or suggestions or questions.
One thing that just caught my eye and totally independent of what you've got here, which I definitely have to read over more and understand. That was a great introduction. So you said it, and the non-creds could never be presented as a JWT. I haven't ever looked at that, but always assumed since a JWT is a valid format for W3C credentials, that we would be able to do something like it. But you say it couldn't be because it requires a IANA-based JSON web signature. Okay. So it's because it's not, it would have to have an IANA registered entry in that list to be able to be used.
I think like because JSON Web Tokens require JSON Web Signature, and a JSON Web Signature, I think you just sign bytes. It can't really work with like advanced crypto schemes, but that's as I understand it. And that's also why they have been looking at like JSON Web Proofs, I think, which allow you to do like multi-signature and these kind of things, because like you need to include the header in the signature. And with AnonCreds, there's like a very well-defined way how you create the signature. So you can just put in a header in the signature. So as it currently stands, I don't think that's possible.
Interesting. It's not something I was really after doing, but it was intriguing to see it said, okay, don't even worry about it. So I won't. The multi-credential thing that you've got is a question. I think that's at a higher level. That's at the protocol level versus the attachments to the protocol. So I think that should be handled at the protocol, I think. But it's interesting if we have a single credential with multiple signatures, whether that makes a difference, how we would handle that.
Yeah, I think then I think having multiple signatures makes more sense to have it in one, because otherwise you would have to duplicate the credential and then you can't really put multiple proofs on one credential. But I think I agree for like the other ones, it probably makes sense to do it on the protocol level and have multiple attachments, where one is, for example, JWT and the other is LDP PC.
Sorry, what was that about? You can't have multiple proofs?
Well, no, I think we should allow within like one attachment of this instance, like to have multiple proofs on the issued credential. But if you want to do multiple formats, like I want to receive the same credential as a JWT or LDP VC, you just include two attachments of this format.
Yes, got it. Yep. Agreed.
Okay.
So I have a comment that hopefully doesn't come out too rambly here, but just drawing on some recent experience working with like DIDs as an example. The implementation of DID methods is quite different depending on the method you're looking at, right? So like the requirements to construct a DID of a given method, like it's difficult to unify that into a single interface. So inside of Acopai, for instance, while we're working on DID peer, what I ultimately ended up doing was just saying something else is going to create the DID, and then we'll just store it into the wallet after that process has been completed. It ended up not being worthwhile to have it all be under one single interface. So I guess the question / comment that I have in this context as well is JWT-VC, data integrity proofs, and AnonCreds credentials, the inputs for like credential offers and credential requests are quite different, at least between like, if we, drawing on my experience again with prior art here with the AnonCreds / in the attachment format, we're looking for things like the credential definition ID, the schema ID, those sorts of values within the offer and request. That's quite different from what's expected in the linked data proof detail attachment format, right? So it feels maybe a little tenuous, a little fragile to put everything into the same structure, the same attachment format, because depending on what format it is found within, you'll expect to see completely different values in the offers and the requests and stuff. So I wonder if there's value still in exploring having separate attachment formats still, I guess. Or what are your thoughts on that, I guess?
Yeah, I think makes sense. I also thought about it before because basically the Aries or the DITCOM protocols for issuance and verification already have like an abstraction layer to support different formats using different attachment formats. So then creating another abstraction layer within an attachment format feels like we're really adding layers on top of layers. So I think that's a good suggestion. I think the main reason why I added it in here is because like if we want to do like a DO2C credential with a data integrity proof that is an ANOMCREDS credential in the end, like would that then require a separate attachment format from using the normal data integrity proofs? And then the question is like, why would we issue it in a DO2C format at all? Because there's already an attachment format and you can just easily convert the credential afterwards. And especially if we're then looking at if we want to support issuing credentials with multiple proofs on it, then where you would issue a credential with an ANOMCREDS proof, a DO2C credential containing a proof array where one is an ANOMCREDS signature or proof, and the other one is an ED24519 signature. Yeah, then having that with multiple attachment formats would be impossible, I think. So then you would already require that complexity. And then I think adding JSON Web Tokens is not too complex. So that's the reason why I ended up like combining them all. Because I think from an implementation perspective, if I look at, for example, RSM with JavaScript, we already have abstractions to issue a DO2C credential and then just provide like, if it's a JWT, we say, okay, we want to issue format JWT, and then we need to provide an ALK value. And if we want to do JSON-LD, then we say, okay, issue in JSON-LD format, and then we provide the proof type. But basically everything under that is abstracted. And then, so looking at this protocol, you could use most of this and have like the same logic for JWT or JSON-LD credentials in that case. So that's why I ended up combining them. But I think there is something to be said to make it completely different attachment formats for all of them.
Okay, yeah. Your thought process makes sense. So if I were to boil down at least one of those points there, just to put it in fewer words for myself, the flex creds idea of being able to have multiple signatures of various types over the same credential value, so you can have an anon creds and like a traditional JSON-LD data integrity proof, linked data proof, whatever, over the same credential value would be difficult if we were splitting the offer and request values across multiple attachment formats.
Yeah, I think, yeah.
That seems fair. Yeah, I think there's probably two sides to this. There's like the protocol layer, and then there's like the layer that we interact with from like the agent frameworks as well. I think what we've done in Acopai, just again, this is me rambling a little bit again. I apologize, but I think from the Acopai side of things, like we have issue credential, which was a pretty simple interface because it basically only issued a non-creds. And then we had issue credential v2, which kind of cranked the complexity of the request bodies that we're sending into these APIs by quite a lot. So maybe it's from the Acopai side that we need to address this complexity as opposed to the protocol side, but I think it's made it more difficult to work with so far, having these different attachment formats. So I don't know that I have a strong opinion to definitely go one way or the other at this point, but Yeah.
Yeah, I think, yeah, that makes sense. I think one thing I like, if we were to create 2 attachment formats, we would have to, I think, duplicate them for like 90%, which then also introduces probably inconsistencies, and that makes it even harder than the API. But I agree, like currently, also in AFJ, the issue credential API becomes really complex because you have different proof formats, and then for each of those proof formats, you have to specify the specific input fields that are needed. And then if we also add it, then there's even more input fields that are needed. So I think at some point, the API that you use to issue credentials using these protocols would not need to be the same as this, but have like an simplification API on top of it that decides like, okay, which attachment format do I use? If the, like, you just specify on the tab level, I want to issue an AnonCreds credential, or I want to issue this credential, you give the input and then it decides like, right, which attachment format do I need?
Right. Yeah.
So I have a comment that's mostly about the signed attachments method of proving DID ownership. I love that. And I was thinking about, so whether it's one thing, you know, whether it's one attachment format or not, it's really useful to have sort of a way to just include an attachment that proves DID ownership. The thing that I've been thinking about, and I don't have a good answer for yet, is that the nonce used is important. You've pulled the nonce from the request nonce from the credential offer, so that the proof is bound to the credential offer, which is excellent. And some way to generalize that, I think, would be cool. But anyway, I love this. What you didn't say here, you specified the idea of the attachment, but you didn't necessarily show the rest of what the attachment would look like. For example, like what the attachment type would be, or did I miss an example? You have like the JWS payload here.
Yeah.
But not really like the attachment that it would be wrapped in, including the type, the attachment type, just on the slightly outer layer from that.
Yeah, I'll add that. I didn't think of that yet.
I don't have anything controversial about that, but I love this. It's really straightforward, and it can be easily done in a variety of ways. So really cool.
Cool. Yeah. So would be curious, like, if other people have opinions on like the point Daniel brought up, like, do we go with one attachment format that has another abstraction layer, or do we keep it like more flat and we just define multiple attachment formats? And if we define multiple, how could we approach like the issue with still issuing AnonCreds and non-AnonCreds credentials as W3C, like with multiple proofs on it?
It sounds to me like we're down, it comes down to 2 issues. JWT being a separate question, and so an obvious way to do it is add another attachment format for JWT. But the bigger question is, what do we do about an AnonCreds being an AnonCreds in W3C format? What has, if we were to not do this, the thing we would have to do is decide how a W3C, an AnonCreds W3C VC format would wind up being issued and presumably presented. So what would the attachment format look like, and how would it have to change? And I think I haven't thought about that enough, and so, you know, if we keep using Indy, what's called the Indy format now, the multi-proof is weird, so that's unlikely to work. So the bigger question to me is, can we make the JSON LD format work with an OnCreds W3C format. And again, I haven't taken a look at that, but I will now.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so we could look at removing JWT from this one, so it becomes really focused on data integrity proofs. I think that would add some simplification, and I'll write another simpler one for JWT credentials, because on a JWT you can put multiple proofs, so there's a lot of complexities that we would be able to drop, but we would still have to add AnonCred specific options somewhere. For the offer, I think for the request, I came up with like this binding proof way, which allows different ways to do binding, which for AnonCreds works well. And well, the credential is the issued one. So the only one I hadn't really found a good way for was the offer method. I think one thing I have been thinking of is like having custom properties based on a specific cryptographic suit, because like the new way that they are now recommending is that you start using like data integrity proof as the type, which would then be for all issuance. So they would need extra properties as well, because like data integrity proof could then be an ED25519 signature, or it could be a what is an RSA signature or whatever. So maybe that we solve it in that way, and then for AnonCreds you just have some other properties that are attached, but that it would also be able to be used for non-AnonCreds things in like a generic way.
That's right.
I think one, maybe two outstanding questions is that if we want to support binding in here and also support multiple proofs, is like if I do AnonCreds binding, I would use link secrets, but if I were to issue an ED25519 signature, I would want to probably use like credential subject ID binding. So then in a single request, we would need to support multiple binding methods, which again makes the protocol quite complex. And also an issue with like, you would sign the credential subject ID for the ED25519 credential, but you probably wouldn't want to include that ID for the AnonCreds credential. So then there's again a difference in the payload between AnonCreds and the non-AnonCreds proof. Okay, that was it from my side. I'll keep working on this and see like what are possibilities and how can we reduce complexity of this one.
Timo, thank you for this work. This is really excellent. Okay, trust input protocol. Before we go to trust input protocol, any final comments on the attachment format work? All right, trust input protocol from the Northern Blocks folks is next up.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. So I will share my screen. So basically just some background on this, and I will the link to the proposed protocol that we drafted is in the the Confluence notes. But basically what we're trying to do here is we're part of different communities or different efforts that are looking at using trust registries as authoritative sources of information. So like How do I know an issuer is authorized to issue a credential? Or how do I know a verifier is authorized to ask what they're asking for? Or even how do I know a specific trust registry itself is authoritative? So just having kind of these authoritative lists, but we've kind of boiled it down to like trust registry is one implementation in Europe. We could refer to it as trust lists, and there are different standards all over the place for this. But just from a technical perspective, what we're seeking to do is avoid just having these, I guess, like central databases that just will get API calls whenever someone is looking for a trust input to make a trust decision. And what we're looking to do is equip trust registries themselves with DIDs and with agents that allow anyone seeking a trust input to be able to interact with them, just like an issuer would interact with a holder or a holder with a verifier. Anyone that's seeking to ask a question to understand if, you know, something's authoritative or just to verify a claim that's being made, they could do so with another entity, just like they do today. And so the vision we had here is to come up with a trust registry or trust input protocol that, alongside other different types of trust tasks, and I'm looking at this hourglass view from the Trust Over IP Foundation, but I'll have, you know, issue credential or present proof as different types of trust tasks, and maybe within my workflow, I want to ask a question before completing the transaction. So the vision really is these trust tasks will be orchestrated together to perform whatever function in whatever context. And we need a protocol to basically reach out and ask a question to a trust registry. And so the idea is, this is just a different view of the issuer holder verifier, where I have the issuer party, the holder party, the verifier party. They're using an issuance RFC or protocol to interact and issue a credential to the holder, which is able to use a proof protocol to interact with here. But perhaps the verifier wants to use a different protocol, the trust input protocol, to interact with another party, which just so happens to be a trust registry. And so we've been building a trust registry product, and we're equipping it with an agent. And on the other side, what we're trying to do is just come up with a specification that allows any other agent over a DIDCOM connection to ask it some questions. So we created the first draft here. It's our first time suggesting an RFC or something like this. So just take that into consideration, and we're sure that there's going to be some comments or feedback, and we're aware that this thing will have to evolve a bit, but we wanted to socialize it with the group here today. So that was kind of the genesis for it. There's some links in here to the slide I was just showing, and gave a presentation on the whole idea to the Trust Over IP's Trust Registry Working Group earlier this year. We took inspiration from another RFC, the questions and answer protocol. And I'm here with my colleague Sebastius. I don't know if Sebastius, you want to just jump in and just give a little bit of an overview of what we're talking about here with the states, and then some of the queries that we're proposing.
Sure. Hi, everybody. So just like the question answer protocol, this has basically two roles. Somebody who's requesting could be a holder, could be any role in that triangle asking a question, and the trust registry is the recipient of that question. And if you just scroll down, Matthew, a little bit. So keeping it very simple, we just have a query where the first attribute is what type of trust task you are querying on. So like Matthew talked about, you can check for whether somebody is an issuer or not, or somebody can verify or not, or somebody is whether it's a valid trust registry or not. So there are various different types of trust tasks that you want to verify on. The include governance is basically that when you're responding with the answer, please provide what is the governance link based on which the trust list was created. And then the next credential metadata is an example for issuance, what are the different inputs that you need to provide so that the trust registry can provide you a response. So here's just an example that here is an ID, what is the format, and whose authority you are checking. So the issuers did, and the three information. And if you scroll down in the response, it's providing whether a particular credential, so it's first providing the governance, what is the governance link based on which this trust list was created, and which credential you are providing the response for, and what is the status. And we thought of 5 different statuses, that it's not in my list, it's valid, it's expired or terminated or has been revoked, and then at what date and time stamp you're providing the response for, at what time this response is valid, at what time. So yeah, that's what we came up with as an initial start for this.
Yeah, so I'll throw it back to the group if there's any questions or anything. I'm sure there are, but this is just the initial concept that we're looking to bring to the Aries community as it evolves to see. And then really we're, as Northern Bloc, committed to demonstrate how we could actually use an agent to then use this protocol to interact with a trust registry. So it's something that we would like to pursue over the next couple of months.
Quick question, I asked it in chat. Is that credential ID the type of the credential or an actual credential?
The credential ID in the query is
down in the credential metadata, there's credential ID.
Yeah.
Is that the type or the actual ID that somebody's been issued that I've got credential?
Sam, it's the actual ID, and the next attribute, the format, is the format, whether it's what type it is.
There's a difference though between the type. I think what Steve is asking, and I have the same question. There's an ID which refers to an individually issued credential. There's the schema, which refers to the which what schema we're addressing, and then there's the actual format. And so the question is this the idea of an individually issued credential, or is this this the idea of a schema of a credential?
No, individually issued credential.
Huh.
That seems weird to me.
Yeah,
I expected it to be this related somehow to the schema of the credential rather than an individual issuance.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think Sebastian, we're either talking about the
Yeah.
schema or creddiff here, not the actual credential.
Yeah. I said that incorrect. It is the creddiff. Sorry.
Okay, so if it's a
Okay.
creddiff, the generic would be credential type. Okay.
Yeah.
That makes more sense. I
Yeah,
would
it
definitely
is
add that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think Steve and I probably tripped on the same thing. The use of ID there.
Yeah.
I think tripped us both up on that.
Okay, so credential type would be the proper way of calling it.
Yes, and that's particularly clear if you have it right next to credential format, right, which indicates the format, of course, of the credential there.
Cool.
Yeah. The question I had, there's 2 places where you, both in credential format and in the status, you have like a 1, 2, and a 3 that map to something. Is there a reason that you use the 1, 2, and the 3 instead of just the actual string itself? Like a non-creds instead of 1, or down in the status, like valid instead of 2?
No reason really. Just to create some type of an enumeration. Yeah. It can be either. We can put the text or one reason. Yeah, now I remember. One reason was, especially in the status, to leave it as 1, 2, 3, 4 was if somebody wants to translate it to a different language, they can use the 1, 2, 3, 4 to translate it to a different language.
Yes, although you could do that localization just off of the like a key string value. So instead of two, it could just be valid. And I usually indicate those as an all lowercase, type of a term just to avoid confusion. And so in the protocol definition, using the backticks to indicate that this is like an absolute value and that's used for this, and that way you don't have any case issues or do I do a space or a dash issues or stuff like that. I think I prefer it just because of the lack of confusion. Two, without the context doesn't mean anything to me, but valid does. And so I think I have a mild preference, like a mild to medium preference for using the actual value or some serialization of the meaning rather than an indicator like a 1, 2, 3. Is the feedback that I've gotten. What I didn't say in the beginning was I love this. If I've got to use a trust registry, interacting with it over DIDCOM makes me much happier than interacting with it over an API. And so I really love that you're doing this work.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity to present it. We'll take those two pieces of feedback for the credential type and then the values into consideration, and we could update this, and I guess we'll keep the group updated as we're progressing on this work.
Awesome, and thank you. We have like 1 minute left. Stephen, we didn't get to your topic today. How on fire is that you're looking for feedback on the JSON RPC, given feedback from last time from the tunneling conversation?
I'll answer that just by saying that I've updated the thing to use JSON RPC. Whoever suggested that was brilliant, and I love it, and it makes it so much easier. So if you want to take a look at that again, we're probably going to go ahead with an implementation because even if it changes, it won't be very much work. So there you go. But it's awesome.
Okay, I have a 10. Thank you, Stephen. I have a 10-second update on the long-term support stuff. Timo, that also I think did we lose Timo? Do we have him? There he is. Yeah, Timo, we had some discussion last week about better ways to sort of articulate that deviations are possible by project, so that this isn't like some top-down thing necessarily. I'm not sure that will answer all of your concerns, but there's been some updates to the long-term support as well. There's a number of issues that are important to talk about. Next week, I would like to talk about kind of an end of the year. So it's the last meeting of the year. So the state of Aries and review what we've accomplished and what we have on deck for next year. That feeds into the first quarter need to present to Hyperledger like the deeper involved discussion, that's our annual report instead of the regular quarterly report. And so this is I'm hoping a precursor to that, where we talk about sort of at the margin of the year here, where we've been and where we're going, to kind of talk about some general ideas. So please bring thoughts, and I'd love to focus on next week on that. We will have these other important topics to bring up, and I'm grateful for both Timo and the Northern Block team for their presentations today, and we'll resume those as fast as we can. But I think having some high level stuff will both help us as a community, and Hyperledger's asking us for a yearly report. So that's on deck for next week, and that will be our last meeting for the year. Thanks, folks. I hope your week is a great one.
Thank you.